Well, welcome back, Reg audience. Today we're talking about simplifying your IT, and we have someone in the studio today who's going to advocate breaking the customization habit completely for some of your software. This is what it takes to get some benefit out of the cloud. That's our argument. We don't know whether you agree with it yet. We'll see whether you agree with it afterwards. So that's our topic for today, simplifying IT with cloud apps. Now, we know that a lot of you are considering software as a service, cloud in general. We know, and we're also doing a lot of regcasts. You request a lot of regcasts, and we give them to you about this. But there is also, we also know that you find it very hard to make the decisions, to work out when to go, what to do, and exactly how to do that. So we're going to be pretty practical with you today. Now, we want you to ask a lot of questions today. I always say that, but we've got some people in the studio who are going to give you some sound, practical advice that will really be worth your while. And so remember, on our interface, ask the question button. Don't complain that we didn't talk about the things that you wanted to talk about. We know because we get your feedback sometimes, and you say that, well, they didn't answer the question I wanted to answer. Well, ask it to us, and we will answer it. Also, give us your feedback at the end. You can get this, you can get the slides that we use. Really important, you will also be able to get this as an on-demand, so you can watch it at your leisure if you want to see it again, if you miss anything, and you can also tell your friends to watch it as well. We'd really appreciate that. Now, who's going to talk about this today? And first of all, first time in the studio, but he's very welcome, from Workday, Henri O'Toole. Henri, welcome to our studio.
Yeah, thanks very much. Great to be here.
Now, we've never had Workday on one of our regcasts before, so for people who don't know who you are.
Yeah, which is probably quite a lot of folks. So Workday is essentially doing kind of big enterprise applications in the cloud. So we're best known for HR, and we also do finance, so kind of big back office applications for large global companies. And you know, think of us as a kind of modern day version of SAP or Oracle.
Yeah, you haven't been around for quite as long as those guys, though, have you?
No, the company was set up in 2005. We went public in 2012. But I think at this stage we're making some significant inroads, and I'm sure we'll talk a bit about that later.
I think we probably will in the next hour or so, because I know that you've got, you're talking about what you do and how you do it in some detail to help us out. So, well, welcome to the studio. Now, also in the studio today, a man with whom you might be a little bit more familiar. Dale, welcome back.
Thank you, Tim.
And this sort of thing takes you back to your old life, doesn't it? That we're
yeah, it does. It does. For my sins, I was deeply involved in the ERP game back in the 90s, and in the lead up to that great period, the whole Y2K thing. Quite a lively time, actually, but a lot of lessons learned back then, and some of them we'll be picking up on today, because some of them are still relevant, even from 20 odd years ago.
If you were involved in that stuff in the 90s, you must have made out like a bandit.
It was a good time to be in the IT industry, let's put it that way.
Yeah, that's good for some of your clients. If you have a problem now, Dale is now available to take your call. Also, guys, you will notice we've got some pictures of our heroes on the set today, and if you're wondering who some of them are, well, ask us in a question, and I'll let you know later on. And as a special offer to some of our Reg readers, if any of you would like to be on our shelf here, then why not ask us? Send us a picture. We'll put some of you up. Let's do that. I think that's friendly. Let's get on with this. Now, we know, Dale, because we've talked a lot about cloud in the past, that there are some advantages to using software as a service, cloud applications. We've gone over that. So what's new today?
Well, today we're not talking about the platform and infrastructure stuff that we've covered on quite a few occasions in the past.
So all the stuff that's at the top of this
list. The stuff at the top of this slide, people have been using all that stuff for test and development, and web type applications, all that kind of stuff we've done. And I think people have pretty much got their heads around what that's about. You can save money, you can drive a bit of flexibility, it can be convenient in different ways. But one of the areas where we find that we get into a lot of discussions about why people should be looking at it, how people should be making decisions and so on is all around business applications. So this is the software as a service piece, that particular variant in the cloud. And that's what we're going to be spending time on today.
That's the thing down at the bottom there. This is absolutely what you do on Ray, isn't it?
It absolutely is, yeah. And just to kind of, I mean, there's a bit of a continuum here that I think is worth talking about, which is that the cloud, in my mind at least, really established itself in the consumer space. I mean, I think that's most people's normal everyday experience of cloud applications is through their mobile device and things like that, or using, you know, Yahoo or Gmail or stuff like that at home. And what I think is new, and what's certainly what Workday is all about, is taking those sets of ideas, those concepts, those technologies, and applying them to the big area of enterprise technology, which is, you know, probably a relatively kind of underserved area because it's been dominated by two major players for the last, you know, as Dale mentioned, since the 90s. You know, so there's still a lot of money to be made in IT. The enterprise stuff is a bit different, and so, you know, I think what we in Workday like to think we're doing is we're transforming, you know, a part of the software landscape, a very large part of it, which is all about these big enterprise applications.
But if I've got a big enterprise application and I spend a lot of time working on it, and I want to use some kind of cloud service, Dale, why don't I just shunt it to the cloud?
I think it depends on where you're starting from. I mean, there are certainly some benefits if you want to, for instance, just re-platform your existing SAP or Oracle system or whatever, stick it in someone else's data center, sign up for a managed service contract, etc. But they're not sort of huge transformational benefits. They're more sort of, you know, they get you so far, but they're not about really breaking some of the old habits.
You don't have to take care of your servers anymore. They'll take care of it for you.
Exactly. But you still have fundamentally the same software stack that you're having to deal with and manage, you know, with all of the traditional things that come with that in terms of administration and maintenance and just the general overhead of managing traditional software stacks.
And to be definite with this, Ray, this is not what you're doing in your data centers either. You haven't got anyone's Oracle in there. You haven't got anyone's SAP or anything like that.
No. I mean, and you know, what this is more than, so for a lot of people, the cloud, you know, represents computing power that's not theirs. It's somewhere out there. Mm-hmm. And so there's this idea, particularly in business applications, that if I take them out of running them on my servers and put them on someone else's servers, then I'm doing cloud. And that's not what we believe at all. We think that what the cloud is much more than just bunches of boxes sitting in a data center. The cloud is a radically different architecture. It's a completely different way of imagining these applications. And a good example, just kind of following on from where I started, is think about mobility. So if you move your SAP or Oracle and put it in someone else's data center, does that magically mean that those applications are now available for employees to use on devices that they want to bring to work? Well, the answer is no, right? That you've still got all of that work to do for yourself. That's a massive, big project to do. Whereas with a service like Workday, mobility is just part of the cloud offering. So it's our job to make sure that the service is available on mobile devices for employees and that it's easy enough and simple enough that they can use it all on their own without you having to do a big IT project to make that occur.
Now, I can see this, Dale, I can see this for when you got something like a Gmail or something like that, where there really isn't anything to be done. So if, you know, someone is the provider for that sort of thing. But people have large teams for this sort of thing. If you're talking about some of these CRM or ERP or sort of like, you know, or HCM, where Workday does a lot of the work, people have got a large development teams that have been working on this stuff, curating it, fiddling with it for a long time now.
Yeah, they have. They've also got lots of people in the business saying, we want to do this, we want to do that, we want you to cut your budgets. And so the teams and IT departments that are nurturing these things and spending a lot of time and effort actually just keeping them running, let alone moving things forward, are generally under a lot of pressure to do other stuff. And we know from all the research we do with Reg Readers that very few of them are in the luxurious position of being able to sit there with spare time on their hands. So everyone's got a backlog. Everyone's got the business pushing to do new things, whether it's mobility, whether it's analytics, whether it's just supporting new business initiatives, going online with part of the business, that kind of stuff. And whilst you're actually consuming a lot of effort doing things the old way in terms of your core applications. So anyway, it's just a way. you can tackle that to a degree by upgrading what you have already. But actually, it depends where you're starting from. Quite often, it's worthwhile saying, well, look, let's just totally look at a different way of doing things, or look at a totally different way of doing things here.
Yeah. Well, we're certainly of the view that the cloud, I think to understand the Workday proposition and to understand what we and other people are doing in the cloud space, you've got to see this as part of a big software architecture journey that, we've made some fundamental changes. So, in the past, what people did was they bought systems like Oracle and SAP, and they did huge amounts they stood them up in their data centers. They did huge amounts of customization. They ran these services. They were responsible for the security, the administration, for the care and feeding, all of this. And that's a huge, complex job, and CIOs got incredibly, it's a very skillful job to do that. And CIOs, they became really good at standing up these massively complex, big applications, and they're very fragile, kind of keeping them alive. And in the cloud, we're moving away. What we're doing is moving the architecture away entirely. So in the old days, you could take stuff and customize the hell out of it. In the cloud, you can't do any customization. And I know we're going to talk about this later.
So what you're basically saying is, for anyone now who's put 10 years into something like this, half their career into it, you're saying, cut your losses. It's never going to get any better than this. You've got to start again, clean sheet of paper, think about it in our way.
That's a timing question, though, Tim, because it depends where you're starting from. I mean, if you've just been through a major SAP upgrade in the last 3 years, I mean, you'd probably be crazy to sort of think like that. But if you're sitting there and you're conscious that you as many people do, because especially with back office systems, you kind of live with what's there, and you kind of resist upgrading. So these things just gradually creep further and further behind the curve, both technology-wise. Some of the platforms these things are running on, old servers and old operating systems that are costing a fortune in maintenance alone. Let alone you may be on 2 or 3 releases ago in terms of the actual software itself. If you're starting with that kind of position, to drag yourself into this modern world of mobile analytics and social and all these other things that departments want is actually a pretty big job in itself. So let's not underestimate that. If you're going to be looking at that magnitude of exercise, you may as well look at a different way of doing things, because if you went through that, chances are you're just going to have bought yourself a few years. You haven't actually fundamentally changed anything, and I think that's the benefit of looking at some other ways of doing things.
Yeah, and some of that I quite wholeheartedly agree with, which is that you're only going to do this if there's business benefits, right? And that's, I think we can talk about the cloud in terms of software architectures and everybody being on the same version, and there's lots of things like that. But I think the more fundamental thing and it's the reason people are buying cloud software, is they're interested in business outcomes. What can this software do for me? And I think we'll get into this a bit later.
We will get into this. So let's not just start that.
Let me just make one point. Just before we move on, that slide that we had. Oh no, forget the actual slide.
Yeah.
But
you can have the slide back if you want.
No, it's fine.
Okay.
Business applications as a sort of category spans from fairly lightweight CRM type stuff at one end, which can just be switched on and you can go with it. Chances are you don't have anything in place that does that already in many business scenarios. Right through to full-on ERP at the other end. And what we've been tracking as a trend is the initial cloud activity was mostly focused around that kind of what I would call lightweight end. But we see lots more people now looking at that, the heavyweight end. And I think that's a reflection of the fact that in the early days of cloud, there was a lot of fairly immature practice and services going on out there. But actually, organisations like Workday have kind of figured out how to industrialise this stuff and bring it to bear on some of those real hard back office type issues, the ones that are subject to a lot of regulation. If it goes down, it hurts the business, and so on. So we kind of shifted in terms of emphasis. Does that make sense?
Yeah. No. That's, and I mean, this is I think a good slide to talk a bit about that, which is that the genesis of Workday is that it comes out of the hostile takeover of Oracle. When PeopleSoft was taken over by Oracle, and so the guys behind PeopleSoft who didn't want to sell up to Oracle, but Oracle eventually got their hands on the company. those guys, Dave Duffield and Anil Bushri, both decided that they kind of weren't done and that they had a good vision for what they thought the future looked like. And so in 2005, they started Workday. And back in 2005, to say that you were going to build, the things that Dale's been talking about, a system of record for HR and financial information. So not a toy application, system of record, which has a load of regulatory, you're talking serious, you're dealing with serious data and you've got to handle it in a very sensitive manner. Building that in the cloud, competing against some of the biggest players in the industry. That was a pretty brave thing to do back in 2005. But as you look at this chart and just look at some of the customers that we've been lucky enough to work with over that time, you can see that we've been pretty successful. And just to call out a couple of the European ones here, you've got Sanofi, major pharma company in France. You got EasyJet. You got people like Aviva in insurance here. And the thing about these is, this isn't a division. This isn't like 100 people inside the company using it. These people buy, the value of Workday is that they can run this system, particularly for HR, on a global basis. And when you have a single system in the cloud, where all employees can access it around the globe, suddenly things become a lot more easy. So for instance, just one concrete example that I'd like to talk about is that knowing how many people work for you, right? So this is you would think that if you're a large organization that you would actually know how many people work for you. Well, the truth is, if you're a large organization in multiple countries, you could have 15, 20, 100 different HR systems. Trying to get all the data out of that and consolidate it into one report and figure out how many people actually work for you. And are they all the same type? Are they all full-time or seasonal or part? So Workday, at its very simplest level, it gives people insight into how many people actually work for them and who they are and where they are, and then how good they are. And that kind of insight, and we're going to talk a little bit more about this, is because the power of the cloud it is the architecture and all that sort of stuff, but it's the business outcomes that enables, the insight that it gives you.
Because there's a lot of people who can do the architecture in various different ways. There's a lot of very large data centers out there, generally speaking. Most of them run pretty well.
Yeah.
You're saying what it is, it's not the data center, it's what's in it, it's what it's providing.
It's the outcomes that it provides. But just to finish the thought, the other thing that's very important here to recognize, and it's kind of right back to where we started with Dale, which is that the people who were involved in setting up Workday right at the very beginning had lived through exactly that 90s period with PeopleSoft and saw the problems that people lived with. And we deliberately set out to build an architecture in Workday to address those problems. And if I was to kind of pick on one theme that I think is really central to what we do, it's enabling graceful change. Because these systems do not stand still, right? We're constantly changing them. The customer's use of them is constantly changing.
Well, I guess you're getting different regulation all the time.
You're getting different regulation. Yeah. You're getting new technologies. When we started in 2005, the iPhone didn't exist. And yet, within 6-8 months of it coming out, we were supporting it. The ability for us to constantly evolve this software in a way that's non-intrusive to our customers, to allow them always be on the latest version, always current, solving that as a technical problem, and I'm a technical guy, that's a considerable challenge, and it's one that I think we can be rightfully pretty proud of.
Now, there's just one thing, before I let you have it, this one thing is, you're looking at these people on the slide, they're big-ish sort of companies, and so they have a big need for the sort of thing that you want. There'll be a lot of people watching this saying, I know exactly how many people work for me because I can see them all.
Yeah.
Are you relevant for them as well?
Yeah, I think you need to be, right now for Workday, you need to be of a certain, we solve a particular, say, a couple of thousand people, and particularly if you're in multiple countries, because once you develop complexity in your organization, that's when a system like ours is really valuable.
Dale, for this, there are a lot of people who are smaller who are talking about, and we've been a little way down this road, talking about people who could maybe completely simplify the whole IT administration by roping together a bunch of cloud applications. Practical at the moment?
It is. I mean, let me pick up on...
I'll tell you why I ask, because I've got a question in from John who's basically asking that. Yeah.
So the question is...
So he's basically saying he's got sort of like different UIs, different sites, wants to, for quite a smallish company, but everyone's everywhere doing different things on different devices. Yeah. And so what he would really, he's not saying, is there something that could just do the things that we want? He just wants to collaborate and work better and simplify these processes.
Yeah.
But he's talking about everything.
So for a small, medium business, and I'd say certainly less than 50 employees, even depending on the kind of nature of your business, maybe up to sort of 250 employees, you can run pretty much all of your IT in the cloud. With the right, you need to spend time selecting the right mix of service
You've been down
providers,
this road, haven't you?
we do it ourselves, and we've done loads of SMB research around cloud adoption. The point I was going to make a minute ago is that a lot of people in the SMB space, they get into cloud because it allows them to do things that would actually be really difficult if they were to try and go and buy an on-premise solution and put the technology in place or upgrade the technology. Something as simple as mobile, for instance, mobile access for an SMB can be quite hard to pull off. But coming back to the question, the golden rule is you want as few suppliers as you can possibly get away with, and that's why you need to do your homework. And even if you're inheriting, if you've got 200 employees or whatever, and you've got a bunch of people that have each sort of in an ad hoc way adopted different bits and pieces of cloud, do an audit of what's there, and you'll find that you've got different services doing pretty much exactly the same thing. Consolidate as much as possible and try and get it down to 2, 3, 4 key providers, and the things to look out for are things we're going to be talking about in a little while, which is making sure that all the bits and pieces are in place to allow these things to work together.
So that comes back to, Henri, what you were saying about scale. There's a certain minimum scale for you for when this becomes a value generating process to be able to use the range and and the ability of what you do. That becomes more efficient at a certain scale.
Yeah, well, the investment that because as Dale will tell you, there's investments that companies have got to make, and the outcomes have to be worth those investments, right? That's really that's the equation that companies have got to work out for themselves.
I think the complexity question comes into it, and when you get beyond a certain number of employees with this kind of application, a whole bunch of organisational complexity starts to kick in. Just your organisation structure, for one thing, needs some pretty clever handling in software terms. When you overlay on top of that, lots of who's able to see what, who,
security,
the security,
privacy,
the policy, simple workflows, review and approval. Not just setting it up initially, but managing it. And the other thing I would say that I was going to interject with a minute ago was a big rationale quite often for moving to the cloud is broadening out access into these back office systems. If I go back to my SAP days in the 90s, the average footprint of an R3, an SAP solution then, was about 10% of the workforce that had direct access into it. I think it's about that, roughly speaking, if I remember rightly.
Yeah.
And there are huge benefits to hooking people directly into those business processes electronically, even if it's only a review and approval step that appears on a mobile app or a self-service capability that's delivered through the intranet portal. It doesn't really matter how you do it, but and this isn't full-on hardcore 9 to 5 users of the application. It's quite often occasional users in specific scenarios. But to put the infrastructure in place and the controls in place to do that using traditional on-premise approaches is actually quite hard, and it probably doesn't justify the investment. But you get all that for free. Well, for free.
You do. No,
it's an automatic part of a cloud service.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that to place this in the right context, in the 90s, what we were doing was automating business processes, right? So a lot of things that companies were doing manually, with pen and paper in many instances, they were able to automate those business processes in the ERP systems of the early 90s. And that automation was good, but you're absolutely right. You end up with only 10% the professional HR guys using it. So all of the form processing and everything had to be done by a small core of HR people. And of course, data gets stale because it's not being maintained by the people it actually belongs to, the employees. So moving into, and this is generally in the industry, in this, in the last 5-10 years, what we've all been talking about is engagement. big enterprise systems that employees can use directly themselves. I don't need to talk to the HR person. I can go directly, see my details, engage, rate my fellow employees, put my hand up for jobs that I might be interested in. You want employees to be able to do all of that stuff on their own, because that level of engagement, creates a better environment for employees and better business outcomes.
So the fundamental question that Paul's asked about this, so fix this, because he's saying, is cloud a new opportunity for a business or a new business opportunity that's just being marketed? And actually, this is where you're drawing a distinction, isn't it? Because you're saying there's a bunch of cloud that's really just a fancy name that they're giving to improving the data center.
Yeah.
Whereas what you're talking about is, for you, it allows your customers to change what they do.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm certainly very much on the spectrum that this is about changing business. I mean, I think that's...
And if it doesn't change business, don't call it cloud, yeah.
Yeah, if it's not, because I think that I had this insight, pretty early on when I was starting to use Google, which was that what the cloud is all about is about analytics, right? Fundamentally, because if you think about Google, what does Google do? Because it's one place where it's capturing all the things that people are looking for, it's able to monetize the things people are looking for into ads, right? Because it has that insight into what's going on. And the same is true in enterprise applications. People, if you don't know how many people you have in your organization, you're not even at kind of ground zero of analytics in terms of understanding what your workforce is doing and how best to use them. And I think more and more organizations want to get into that kind of business of being really knowing who their best employees are, what they're working on, are they getting the best out of them? And equally, employees want that engagement with the organization as well. And that type of change is what I think this technology enables.
Good. Well, we're getting into a few specifics in a minute. And if you want to know about those specifics, because I know you always do, make sure you get the questions in about that, because we've got the right people in about this. We've been testing him. Onray can answer anything about this. Now, we're going to let you show off your Forrester wave. Since you're at the top, but you're only a small little ball in the Forrester wave, even though you're in the best bit.
Yeah. So the little ball, for those who aren't familiar with it, represents market presence. So we're small. So for me, this is your classic example of Christian Claytonson's innovator's dilemma in action. When we started coming out in 2005, 2006, 2000, and even right up to fairly recently, the big guys, the Oracle and SAP were saying, you couldn't trust your data in cloud. Cloud's not suitable for large enterprise. So we were the classic innovator's dilemma. New platform, new technology, rattling pretty big cages. Now, Oracle and SAP can't get enough of the cloud. So this is exactly innovator's dilemma in action, that we've transformed this industry.
Does it matter that you're a small ball?
No, not today.
But on the other hand, cloud...
To be fair, there's a certain critical mass I think you need to reach before you get the bigger deals and Workday's beyond that. So it's relatively small compared to the juggernauts in the market, but it's not small per se, I would argue.
No, we're not. We're
beyond that startup sort of phase and got a bit of credibility, and that's important as well. Just if I was to sort of make a general point,
if I'm watching this, I'm going to be thinking I need to know this is fundamental to my business.
There are a lot of very small cloud players out there, and they're constantly emerging and they're constantly disappearing. They're constantly getting bought.
Well, that's it. To be fair, some of them are waiting around to be bought, aren't they?
So this is why you really, really, really need to do your homework. As I said right at the beginning when we talked about, you can run your business on a few cloud systems, but they have to be the right cloud systems. And there's nothing wrong with taking a punt on a very small startup player, provided you've really done your due diligence. It's just that you have to do a lot more work to make sure that you're going to be safe with them. Once you've got beyond a certain level as a provider and you've got a certain critical mass and you've got blue chip clients, then obviously you can get a bit of comfort from the client base that is there.
Yeah. No, the reason I was smiling was that so Workday is a publicly listed company, and people can look at our financials and see that we're pretty large and got substantial cash, et cetera, et cetera. But what I like about Workday is that we feel like a startup, right? Because if you look at the size of the people that we're competing with. They're still a lot, regardless of how big you want to think we are today, they're still a lot bigger. So that's the interesting piece to me.
How many people work for you now?
Oh, I don't know.
You should know. You should know. You should know exactly.
No, what I'm struggling to remember is what is the officially blessed correct answer in terms of our public statements on. It's over 2,500 employees.
Okay, we'll look it up afterwards. We'll get exactly what it is and see whether the number's ticking up or ticking down. I assume it goes like that. Let's have a look at some of the Reg Reader research quickly, Dale, on this sort of thing. So we have a series of pie charts here, which are sort of a left-right split. First of all, attitudes to software as a service.
Yeah, so we see a spectrum of attitudes. If you look at this chart, if you're more on the orange side, you're not so much a cloud fan. If you're more on the black side, then you're more of a cloud advocate. And there's people are just at different places on that spectrum. But one of the things that we do find in the research, and we've got literally tens of thousands of data points on this, is that if you correlate affinity to use cloud, so you're likely to go down the cloud route, you're much more likely to also be a business that's relatively successful in your marketplace. You're also likely to be a business that has a good relationship between IT and people actually out there, users and business unit managers and the consumers of IT within the business. Now, you always have to be very careful with research to infer cause and effect.
I was about to nag you about this, yeah.
But cloud adoption is one of those attributes of a business that tends to be doing quite well, both internally and externally in commercial terms. But the interesting thing is that's nothing new, because when you look at a lot of those businesses, historically those businesses have tended to be fairly open about the use of external services, traditional consulting, even traditional forms of outsourcing, the kind of stuff that we said wasn't cloud. You typically find they've been doing that before.
But it was the only game in town at the time.
But these are the guys that are actually appreciating that the cloud thing is starting to give them a little bit more advantage in certain areas. And they tend to be, there's a term we use, which is a bit of an analyst term, source agnostic when they're making decisions. So they focus on, this is what we need to do in business terms. How we do it is secondary to actually delivering against that. And it may be that we're best served by upgrading our SAP system or our Oracle system on site. There are situations where it actually makes sense, but they don't they don't automatically assume that that's the best way of doing that. They say, is there another way of solving this problem? And that's when they start to look at cloud services and different delivery models in general. So it's that kind of open-mindedness about how you solve the problem that tends to go with this kind of behaviour.
Yeah, it's part of a large secular, for me, it's part of a large secular trend in IT in general, where more and more people are saying, what are we really good at? Are we really good at buying all our own hardware, standing up all our own things, care and feeding it? Or are we better off, subscribing to a service where, we're one of many people using that service? Do you want to be on your own, doing your own thing, or, part of a greater, take advantages of the economies of scale and the quality of service that you can get by subscribing to a service.
I'm going to move us on to the next one, because we've got because I like this. This is my favourite chart of the.
Was it? It's great.
Yeah, and but also because we got a follow up from Paul. He's basically, so this comes to what you were saying, Henri, that he's saying, is it that are we saying that cloud is good for just analysing and sort of almost manipulate, knowing more about your people? Or is it about giving them what they want? Because as you were saying, it's good for analytics. A lot of people will be saying, what's in it for me?
Yeah, well, in my mind, they're opposite sides of the same coin. If you make the daily transactions, the thing that people need to do, a lot simpler so that they can do it themselves, then you're going to get two things. One, they're going to do it rather than ask someone else. So you're going to get good data. You're going to get people entering good data, and it's going to be live and up to date. And when you have all of that good data and it's live to up to date, then that makes your analytics all the more powerful, because the data that you're using to make decisions is not stale data or incorrect data. It's current live data. So those two things fit together.
I guess it goes to the appetite of the business that's using the application as to whether they use it to work out the people, who's not working hard enough, or whether they work out what would people, what would make the business better and make the people happier.
I have to say I don't see that as a kind of management versus employee type thing. I think it's in everybody's interest that, as an employee, you want to be doing the best.
Mm-hmm. And there's some experiences actually from history. I mean, the early days of CRM, for instance, there were a lot of people that rolled out CRM solutions on the basis that their sales force was going to be more productive, and they were going to use this thing interactively and benefit from all this analytics within their own territory. And then the sales managers and directors were able to look down on things, get finite visibility of what's going on and ultimate predictability. Of course, at the end of the day, these things were let's just say not that usable and not that accessible. Sales guys out on the road couldn't necessarily get into them. So what you ended up with was a partial kind of people paying lip service to the CRM system in the field. You ended up in a worse place because you now assumed you had visibility, but what you had visibility of was people's very basic minimum contribution.
It wasn't helping them do business, but it certainly helped some people control them if they wanted to use it that way.
And so there's two things I would call out. One of them is this accessibility thing goes hand in hand with the visibility. The other thing is, I don't know if we're going to touch on this later, but I'll mention it now anyway. If you want to change anything in traditional systems, quite often you have to put a request in to some centralized administration function, which very often is IT. When the better service providers have designed their cloud architectures, they've designed it in such a way that they assume that you want as much administration and management put in the hands of business users, i.e. non-technical people, as possible. Mm-hmm. What that means is that people out in the business are much more likely to keep the thing in line with how they're working and
providing it's properly designed.
Provided it's properly designed,
Yes.
Yeah, which is exactly what this chart is.
Which is exactly what this chart's coming to. Exactly,
yeah, because this is a great chart for me because I think it's telling the whole story, which is that if we look at the historic role of IT, what they were trying to do was manage incredibly complex systems that are those systems needed to be up because the business depended on them. So keeping them stable and alive was the highest priority. People needed to be able to get into them, and keeping systems stable and alive and changing them are kind of a dynamic tension, right? Mm-hmm. Because change introduces instability and so on and things like that. And so what this chart says is the business side is saying, here's all the changes we want, and the IT guys are saying, hold on, making all those changes into the way these systems are architected is really hard for us. Slow down. And so you end up with people on the opposite sides of this negotiation, so to speak. And I think that part of what the cloud is doing is, it's back to this, it's broad consumerization of technology. And we're consumerizing enterprise technology and moving all of that kind of change management into the cloud providers. That's our job now, is to keep that. And so it totally changes the conversation with the business.
So there's a question from Jonathan here, and he's talking about this, that he's been in IT a long time, and he says we've been discussing this problem of IT against the business forever.
Forever, yeah.
What you're saying is that, if I get this right, that we can now design in ways to really get to the heart of this.
Yeah.
But a lot relies on you designing, because people are not customizing what you're doing. They don't fiddle around with it. You got to design it well so that people can use it.
That's exactly right. Yeah. So we've got to do a good job of building that architecture and building that change, building that fundamental capability to change into the architecture.
And there's two elements to it. One of them is that fundamental architecture. So soft coding as much as possible, so that workflows and data structures and so on, it can appear as if you're tailoring the system, but actually all you're doing is just making it look like...
You just make it look something's familiar.
Exactly.
The button's in the same place as people.
So you're not coding, you're configuring is the point. So having an architecture that's very, very friendly in that sense is one thing. But the other thing, I think this is where I think a lot of first generation cloud providers fell down, was you then have to surface that capability to non-technical people in a way that they really genuinely can use, not one that they need to go on a week-long training course to learn how to drive and so on.
Because they're not going to use that.
Exactly, and particularly when some of these end users are only going to maybe perform an operation occasionally, once every month, or on an ad hoc basis. So usability is absolutely key with that administration.
Let's get to the last of your charts on this, because this is a good insight, I think, on this one, isn't it? So take us through this one now. Yeah,
so, well, just to put it into context, we've mentioned the 90s a few times when a lot of the ERP activity took place, the first wave. But the interesting thing is, we still got the legacy behaviour from that time. And if you go back to all of the activity in the mid-90s, one of the reasons SAP, for instance, did really well is because the big systems integrators, big management consulting houses, all started pushing it. And why did they push it? It was because, very simply, there was between a 1-to-4 and 1-to-6 ratio between the amount of money you spent on software and the amount of money you spent on services.
The amount of money you spent with them.
With the SIs. So it was just great business for the SIs. So no wonder they promoted it in the early days. Now, that just instilled a whole culture in organisations around packaged applications, as we used to call them in those days. That you would spend a lot of money on services to actually customise it to make it do what you wanted. So what we're looking at here is a chart which basically, this is a relatively recent one, so this is sort of contemporary, and we asked people
last time
you implemented it.
Last time you basically fiddled around with it a lot.
So if I add these pies up, I think I've got a note here. 87% did a significant amount of customisation if you add the orange one and the grey one together. Okay, so it's normal behaviour. You just expect to be able to do it. If we flip to the next slide, then if you ask people, well, would you do anything differently? The majority say, yes, we would, and we do a lot less customisation. And the people that, if you flip to the next slide again, the people that really, really tell us that are the ones that actually did a lot of customisation.
They got burnt the first time.
Exactly. So the more customisation you've done recently, the more acutely aware you are of the fact that that's, largely speaking, a bit of a distraction from actually solving the business problem.
So, and customisation is an easy word to say. So let me... I like to just paint a slightly different picture, of what people were actually doing. So they were buying a version of some, and an SAP package isn't kind of like just one CD and you stand up one server. I mean, when you buy these big on-premise systems, they're huge, complex things with loads of different servers, all running on different versions of operating systems with different versions of databases. So you install that thing, and then you went around and you did a whole bunch of specific coding changes that changed it. So you were the only person in the entire world running this particular combination of things with all your customizations. So you were on your own, and it was, the analogy I like here is the pottery barn. You break it, you own it. So you were left. This is what IT had this thing. There was only one of them in the world, and they had to keep it up and running. And that's what customization means, and that's hard.
But here's the other argument, and it's just come in from Jonathan. He says, you can't have technology driving the business. That's insane.
That's true.
But
this appears to be what you're saying.
No. This is the whole point. I mean, well, you go first.
Yeah, I mean, it's exactly right. You need to. So there's a guy called Ray Wang who does a very good job on this, and he says, we've gone from buying features and functions, where we bought technology and we picked out all the features and functions and we customized and we stood it up, and that was the way we thought about enterprise applications. We've gone from that to buying experience and outcomes, and that's what people aren't interested in anymore, in the whole technology stack. And they say, what's it going to do for me? How is this going to change how we do business? How am I going to get more predictable outcomes in terms of employee satisfaction, customer satisfaction, whatever though. Those are the things that people are interested in.
But Dale, for this one, it sounds like what we're saying is it's a good thing that you buy some software, and however it tells you to run your HCM, your ERP, or anything like that, you basically then reorganize the business to match that.
Yes, I think that's.
But then that's
usually
technology
the case.
Driving the business, and then that's insane.
No, it's not technology driving the business at all. It's saying that if you have an application which has been designed based on industry best practice, particularly in back office type functions where they're non-differentiating. I mean, one of the examples, if you take, I'm not really an HCM man in the same way as Ray, but if you take the ERP sort of side of things, if the system offers you 10 ways of doing invoice matching, for instance, most people probably couldn't even think of more than about 4 or 5 ways of doing invoice matching. But in a decent ERP system, you're given a lot of options. If you now decide you want to stick with your way of doing it, which happens to be the 11th way, you've got to ask yourself, really, how did this process come about? Because it's not industry best practice. It's probably it's not at all giving you any business benefit doing it differently. So why would you? And when you track back the reasons why people do strange things with business processes, it's usually because this department merged with that department, and there was a bit of a political infight, and so we had to let them do this, but these guys had to keep this, and so we fused it together, and we end up with this complex business process, which had nothing to do with the fundamental business problem. It was just as a function of history. And I think there's an opportunity when you implement any new business system to clean a lot of that stuff up. So what we're saying is not compromise on the business process, but just realise that actually, if you're working with a system that has embedded best practice, I don't know, you're not a big fan of the term best practice, but embedded good ways of doing things.
But I see what it means in this specific example.
It challenges you, and think about it, and chances are you're not doing yourselves any favours by perpetuating that convoluted.
Well, that's the thing. I'm not in favour of the loose use of best practice for lunch or anything like that. But best practice for these things, there are defined ways in which you can work with regulation and things like that, which you are capturing, putting them in, and just making the interface configurable. They can turn things on and turn things off. But don't get into it.
They can do more than that.
Yeah.
So they can customize business processes and flows and things like that, and they can customize reports, and they can customize. Actually, in Workday, you can configure.
Can we distinguish? Can we introduce a bit of terminology here, just for the sake of discussion? Let's use the word configuration to mean kind of soft setting up of workflows and coding structures.
That's right.
Thing. Customization, coding, right?
Coding,
so actually cutting
configuration good, customization bad. At least for the next 10 minutes.
I was getting my terminology confused here. So it's exactly that bright red line about whether you can add additional code into the system or not. In Workday and in cloud systems, you can't. You can't go change Google or those sort of services. In Workday in particular, you can configure a huge amount, and you can put a lot of the things that you want in there, but you can't extend it with your own custom code. That's the thing that it doesn't let you do that.
So to get this, let me just make a point here. If you think about it from Ray's business and similar players out there, if you imagine if you were designing a system that was going to serve hundreds of customers, all of which had different, subtly different requirements, even though fundamentally they might be the same, you would architect it in such a way that you soft code it as much as possible, and so there's a kind of double, triple incentive for cloud providers to really seriously spend time on that architecture design side of things, because if they don't, it makes their business very costly to run.
So that's why we're saying, because it's a funny slide, this benefits, forced compromise and prohibited bespoking. That's why we're saying that they're benefits and not disadvantages.
Yeah, I mean these are obviously phrased in such a way as to incite.
I might have phrased these.
Pejorative terms like forced compromise. So no, I mean I think that the thing, it's back to where do you want to be? Do you want to be the only person in the world running a unique version of a system for you, or in the Workday world, every customer runs the exact same version? There's only one version of the Workday system, and everybody is the same. It's the same SLA, it's the same security provisions, it's the same underlying data privacy regulation. It's the same thing. You can configure all of the things that are important to your business in that world so that it does what you want it to do, but you're the same as everybody else. I think that safety in numbers is what I genuinely believe that's lower risk, and it's a better outcome for our customers.
Now we're going to have to move you on because we've got 10 minutes left, and I want to discuss two really important things. One of which we've already got a question in. And from Paul, who's asking about how do you ensure portability with cloud services. Last time we were in this studio, we were talking about building open cloud systems and not getting stuck in silos. And so what we need to do is we need to talk a little bit about how you, well, basically how you play together with other applications, either on-premise or other cloud applications.
Yes.
And now, Dale, your schematic here is, it basically makes the point that it's never going to be very simple. It's never going to be simple. There's always going to be multiple.
This is a tool. So there are two forms of SaaS relevant to this kind of discussion. One of them, Omre would dismiss immediately as not being cloud, and that's when you take something which you would normally run on premise and you run it in a cloud system.
Yeah.
And our cloud services out there, if you take something like SharePoint as a really simple example, lots of organizations out there offer SharePoint. You can also run it on premise. If you fall out with your provider or you don't know what they're doing, you can move to another provider or you can move it in-house. You've got that level of portability. The reality, though, is that when organizations like Workday have built cloud, so these scalable and configurable cloud services from the ground up, you do end up with essentially a proprietary system. And there's no getting away from that. So the question then becomes, what have they done around the edges to help you integrate and move things in and out of the system? So on this slide, for instance, we've got some things here that are actually really important. Migration tools for import, export, moving data around, not just the data, but also the structures, being able to import and export your metadata, for instance. Some cloud providers are awful at that, and they're just non-existent. They just assume you're going to start afresh and you're never going to leave. You want to make sure that those are in place. Standards, whether it be APIs or any kind of integration standards that are relevant, those kind of things need to be in place. But also, you're not going to want to duplicate effort. The last thing you want with cloud, and big danger with cloud, is you set up silos that become very difficult to interoperate with anything else and difficult to move into and out of. So things like synchronizing directory structures and policies and workflows and anything else that's relevant between, say, your ERP system and your HCM system. All these things are absolutely critical.
So how do you do it?
Yes, Dale's totally right. And I wouldn't try to attempt a Panglossian view of this world. Right? Yeah. There are complex problems about getting data in, so typically what we would find in Workday is that if someone's doing a big replacement of an SAP or Oracle, when they take those systems out, you can imagine that there's all these dangling wires of things that they used to talk to. And that is anywhere from 80 to 200 different systems, right? These things are heavily plumbed in.
Yeah.
Right? And so when you put Workday in, we've got to reestablish those connections. And frankly, that's the reason I'm sitting here. So I'm not in this, I'm a relative newcomer to the enterprise application world. I really started in the middleware world. I did a company that specialized in what was known as web service-based middleware enterprise service bus. Workday acquired my company in 2008 precisely so that Workday could offer a powerful integration offering in the box so that we can make it easy for our customers to precisely plumb Workday into these.
Do you actually go out on premise and work it through with them?
It's all done in the cloud, but I mean, we provide...
what I mean is go and meet them.
Well, that's our, whoever's doing the implementation work.
Yeah.
But what we do is provide the tools, the tooling, all of the things that people need in order to configure Workday so that those integrations become an awful lot easier for them to do. So we don't think we're done yet, by the way. We think we've done quite a good job on integration and getting data in and out, but we think that there's lots more that we can do.
And let's just quash one misconception here. It's easy to interpret a lot of what we've been saying as it devalues the role of IT. IT is no longer needed with some of the stuff.
That's the standard story, yeah.
It's this area. IT still has to take care of this. I mean, your users with the best will in the world are not going to know what questions to ask when performing due diligence on a service provider around this kind of area. They're not going to be able to deal with the technicalities of migration, integration issues, and so on. So, I mean, there's still a huge role for IT in all of this, particularly in larger organisations. But the question is, do you have the right kind of tools? And when you're evaluating these cloud providers, you have to ask, are they giving me the kind of tools I need to do my job as an IT pro? And that's a really important part of the due diligence.
These are questions to ask, and you don't always get a good answer. No. I've heard you say this before. And also on this, you can see what people are finding critical here. Accountability comes through, and on this sort of thing, if you get this sort of stuff wrong, you've got legal problems, haven't you, Henri?
That's correct. Yeah. By the nature of the fact of the organisations that we deal with, who tend to be, on the larger side, we get all this scrutiny, right?
Okay.
Particularly, you're absolutely right. IT must own overall governance of how Workday is going to operate in the environment with other things and things like integration. And we get a huge amount of scrutiny, a huge amount of legal due diligence, particularly on security and data privacy issues, because we're handling some of the most sensitive information they got about people's names and addresses, salary, all that sort of stuff, personal identifiable data. And so we have a very high bar that we have to meet, and it takes, and quite rightly, we end up in very long conversations with our customers, because the customer's got to do due diligence on us to make sure that we're doing the right thing by them, that they can turn around with confidence to their employees and other stakeholders and say, yeah, we've checked this out. So it's not a short conversation, it's a long one, and it's an important one.
Yeah. So it's less of an issue for the, what I might call the grown-up systems, these hardcore sort of back office systems that Henri's just been talking about. Where we see people running into more problems is actually with those lightweight systems.
Mm-hmm.
It's very easy to just whack a CRM system in place very quickly without even IT knowing about it, let alone being involved, and then ending up creating a little silo of stuff which solves an immediate problem that a group of users might think they have, but then ultimately grows into now a parallel customer database, which now is not necessarily going to play nice with other systems that are in place. And these things have a habit of growing and becoming strategic. This is why, if you go back to that pie chart, the relationship between IT and their internal business clients is really important, because you want that dialogue, because you want them to come to you and say, we want to do this. And they could, with these lightweight systems, they can whip out their credit cards and get themselves into trouble very, very easily and very quickly. You want to be discouraging them to do that, be supportive, and making sure that it's done properly if it's done, because there is an IT component in most cloud implementations.
Is there anything, Henri, the hard questions that you get that you would give some solid advice to reg readers? Always ask this question.
Well, certainly on any of the data privacy stuff, you've got
you've got to be bulletproof.
You've got to be, because that stuff is that's I think that's a concern, and it's becoming rightfully a more important concern for people, that you got to be good on that. Beyond that, I think you just got to go. Look at you should be expecting independent certification for SOX 1, SOX 2, ISO 27001. I think,
have to, guys will know, I guess on sort of like larger companies, well, even the medium-sized company, they'll have a checklist on those things.
But even down to, even the type of services that you're saying you can get, buying with a credit card, they potentially could be touching personal data.
Yeah, they could, yeah.
And you gotta go through, and most cloud vendors will even small ones are going to stand up to those sort of tests.
Lovely. We're in our last couple of minutes, guys. We need you to. I need you to get to sum up. We've got our further reading slide up here as well. I'm very entertained by Gartner's Nexus of Forces. I thought I was playing that last night. And so if we're gonna sum it up, the big problem at the moment with cloud, let's say the problem with what's called cloud, Henri.
Yeah, I think that cloud is a bigger term than Workday can define. It's this big thing, but I think there's all the difference in the world between, essentially an on-premise system that's standing up in a host in someone else's data center. That to me is not cloud. Cloud is something that, it must be it's a single multi-tenanted services, so everybody's the same. You should be looking, if you see a single SLA from a cloud vendor, and that's the only thing they've offered, then it's a single service. That's the sort of thing because that's going to be architected incredibly differently, and it's going to lead you to the business outcomes that I think are important.
That's really interesting, because when we first got into cloud, we immediately started saying, let's differentiate some SLAs in the tiers of service and things like that. What you're basically saying is the real secret sauce is build the whole thing to a single
because then everybody's the same. We love all children equally.
It's just some are prettier than others. Dale,
no ugly babies.
Dale, you get the final word on this. What are the questions that people miss? How useful is this as a step forward?
The one thing I would say, just as sort of parting advice, is just make sure you know where this thing is going. There's lots of cloud service options being thrown at you on a day-to-day basis. There's lots of promotion going on, lots of campaign activity, lots of things that you can just sort of get into very quickly. At the core of everything needs to be what you're trying to achieve, the business outcomes, as Omro was saying. At a practical level, when you're looking at a particular cloud service as a possibility, ask yourself what else does it need to play nicely with, and look for those integration points, and then make sure that it comes with all the kind of IT tooling and standards and everything else that you're going to need as an IT pro to make sure that it does actually play nicely and as time goes on.
And there's no final question. Paul gets his final question, and you don't get out of this by just saying that the customization is owned by the customer and the basics owned by. No. You're both shaking your heads on that.
No,
that's not work. That's not a long-term idea.
No. You got all the, because then you're back into what version we're running on, and if you know the version number you're running on, it's not cloud.
Okay. Okay, guys, now we're out of time. So thank you very much. Thanks for all your questions. They were good questions today. And thanks for both of you for giving straight answers on those. We hope that was useful. Please tell us what you would like some more of, because at the Reg we do more of what you want. But for this time, I've been Tim Phillips. And from the Reg, goodbye.